Welcome to the Awesome Earthkind podcast, Carl Nettleton. If you would, please let us know who you are, where do you live, where do you work, what kind of work you do.
Hey, Ron, delighted to be here. Great to see this great podcast that you've been doing. Carl Nettleton, I've got a consulting firm called Nettleton Strategies. Our catchphrase is we help people to think, but we have a lot of focus around, water and climate and energy and oceans. And I'm in San Diego, California, where right now it's, believe it or not, 80 degrees.
I am so jealous,
Offshore wind and everybody's at the beach.
Man, I'll tell you. So, yeah, offshore wind, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in the meantime, you've got a whole different way of thinking about energy, Carl. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about those thoughts you have with, in particular, energy, commodity, capital, that sort of stuff that we talked about.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We always think about energy as a commodity, and you know what it is. We get, our gas and electric company. We get our energy from gas and electric, and it's got a per unit cost, and that's how we buy it, right? I do a lot of work around water utilities, and I started thinking about this in a different way. They start saying, well, we should add some clean energy to our mix. And yeah, that's a good idea, but you're still thinking about it sort of like a commodity. The real change is when you think about it as a capital cost. So, energy and water, there's a big nexus there between how much energy you use and how much water you use. And then when you start thinking about energy as part of the capital cost at a utility, you start thinking about it in a different way, because it means that your all of your rate structures has energy built into it, and it goes out 25, 30 years maybe before you have to think about, redoing the infrastructure. And it makes you think about it in a different way. It incorporates energy that not only can help you save money, but it can also help, add extra clean energy to the grid. So I really think that's the way we should think about it. And the same when, instead of in your home, instead of thinking about just putting solar on the roof, what you're doing is you're really financing a way to build infrastructure that's a capital cost in your home, that is part of the value of your home, and it saves you money in the long run and does the right thing for the planet.
So by thinking about it as a capital expenditure, we put the capital in and then sun shines and we've got free energy. Is that kind of the idea?
Well, it's not exactly free, but it's, over time, depending on how long your financing is, it gets to be a lot lower cost. And what you don't have to worry about is you don't have to worry about the accelerating cost of the commodity that the energy companies are working on, because they're going to have changes in their costs. Their rates are going to go up. You don't know what your rates are going to be 20 years from now, but you do if you capitalize the cost of that energy. And that's particularly important in an area where I'm in the West, where water is getting more and more expensive and is really, some ways, a scarce commodity. That's pretty valuable to keep those rates down.
Awesome. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about that nexus between water and energy and some of the things that you've been thinking about and working on?
Well, I guess you're kind of referring to some of the techniques we mentioned in one of our earlier conversations. I mean, certainly there's been a trend towards looking at new places to have solar in areas where water is what we're talking about. And so in San Diego, for instance, there's one of the local reservoirs here has solar panels floating on the reservoir. I know they've done a big one in Japan. And another one of the things that I like is the big water utility here is creating a smaller reservoir above one of their main reservoirs, pumped hydro they call it. So in the day when there's plenty of solar available and it's low cost, they're pumping that water from the big reservoir up into the little one. And then at night, when energy is more scarce and, in the peak times rather than at night, but in the peak times, they're running turbines that from the water as they run it from the little reservoir back down to the lower one. And so, it's a real neat way to try to gain some extra component of clean energy and save the utilities some money as well.
Pretty cool. Now you took that concept and you expanded a little bit of energy and water and started talking a bit about what they're doing in Europe. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
District heating and cooling is a way where your energy is centralized in a new kind of way. It's steam and using pipelines that go back and out through the buildings in a district is what they call them, and it's really been common in Europe for some time now, and it's just now catching on in the United States. I think it's an interesting concept. I'd like to see where it goes. I mean, the challenge, of course, in newer cities and any city that doesn't have that infrastructure already, you got to go underground kind of to do it. So there's challenges there.
Yeah, a month or two ago, we had actually some folks from Massachusetts, and I was completely astonished that I knew that natural gas pipelines, went back 100 years. So that part was not knowledge to me. What was new to me was that actually some natural gas pipelines in the United States go back 200 years. There's natural gas pipelines that were actually created during the time of Lincoln, if you can believe such a thing, and they're now leaking. And they're leaking methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, which is a problem. But even worse is that methane is flammable and is blowing up different communities. So in Massachusetts, they had this big issue with a whole community that basically got taken out and was down without heat, without gas for months before they were able to fix it. And these folks came up with the idea, working with the utility gas pipeline people, to, instead of fighting the utilities and basically forcing them out of business as we move from a fossil fuel with natural gas to more cleaner sources, is to set up district geothermal systems where you're using the same kind of pipe, the same kind of carbon filament pipe that you use for natural gas, but instead of having natural gas from house to house, you now have a central district geothermal heating system going from house to house. So that concept is actually being piloted now in a bunch of different communities with various different utilities. Yeah, kind of.
Well, it's interesting because in Southern California, when we think of geothermal, we think about the very hot water that is below the surface of the earth in certain places. Yeah, one of the places you might think about it is in Yellowstone with the geysers and the hot pools there. But there are a number of places in California. One is in Imperial Valley out here east of San Diego, and that geothermal is where they pump that hot water up and they run steam plants that create energy that's clean, and then they pump the water back down into the hot pool down below. But we had some friends that moved up to Washington. They started talking about putting geothermal in their house, and I'm thinking, geez, are they going to drill down into the hot steam down below there? And it's not. It's the differential in temperature between what the earth, the temperature of the earth down below a little bit, and the differential at the surface. And as I understand it, and they're doing some things in Hawaii with that too, with the ocean. The ocean gets pretty deep right off the island, so they're creating energy through the differential between the surface temperature of the ocean and the temperature, several hundred feet down.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So you're talking about the fact that this geothermal means different things to different people. And you're right, in California and in the big island of Hawaii, geothermal means tapping into the magma, the hot magma that's down there, and using it to create steam, and then using that steam to spin a turbine and create electricity. But in this part of the Northeast United States and elsewise, it's geothermal, or a ground source heat pump, where when you go down more than 4 feet, the Earth's constant temperature, which in this part of the country is about 55 degrees, means that you start with 55 degrees, you send the fluid down in a pipe, it comes back up, now that fluid is 55 degrees, and you use a heat pump to compress and expand, and just like your refrigerator does, it removes or moves heat around, and use that heat pump to either heat your home or to cool your home or other building. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, I keep forgetting that geothermal in California means something completely different than geothermal elsewhere. So thanks for picking that up.
I was pretty impressed that they were going to drill down to the magma to heat their
house. Yeah, well, it's a really good point. So all right. So energy is electricity, it's heating and cooling, and it's transportation. And you had some really interesting insights into electric cars. So why don't you tell folks about that, if you
Well, you were just talking about how long there have been natural gas pipelines back to the era of Lincoln. Well, let's go back a little farther than that. Who was president in 1835? Zachary Taylor or somebody. First small electric car powered by non-rechargeable batteries, 1835.
Wow.
So And by 1896, because of range limitations, which we still talk about today about electric cars, and there's a lack of charging infrastructure, the electric light company, Hartford Electric Light Company, created a battery exchange service for electric trucks. Something we've literally talked about. I know there was a company in Israel that was piloting, a battery that was in your trunk that you could change out when you went effectively to the equivalent of a gas station. But they were trying that out in 1896.
Wow.
And by 1900, the percentage of cars by power source is fascinating to me. 38% of the cars were electric, 40% were run by steam, and 22% by gasoline. And there weren't a lot of cars. There were 34,000 electric cars at that point in time, and that was 38% of the whole market in the U.S. But it's fascinating how things come around. I think there were people racing electric cars and they were winning races. And by 1911, they had the first gasoline electric hybrid car. But by 1926, the last one that was made in Detroit was likely sold, 1926. Wow. And so what happened? Mass production of the Model T, cheap Texas oil, a more developed road network, and people wanted to travel longer distances. So the range anxiety thing kicked in, and there was no charging infrastructure. And the electric cars really, in general, the kind that the public would buy, had slower speeds. And then tough economic times during World War I. And the most amazing factor of all was there was a stigma that electric cars were for women, which, you just got to shake your head.
Just not macho enough, huh?
Yeah, just not macho enough. So let's pump that gas. And,
man.
Yeah. I remember reading in a AAA magazine in 1904 about which has been around a long time too, the Automobile Club, about how delighted people were to have gasoline cars because they were so much quieter than the clumping of horses and how horses made the streets dirty. And now here come 100 years later, and gasoline cars are considered noisy and they pollute in a different way.
Yeah, so I didn't really thought about it, but I guess, if you got a lot of horses clomping around, it's loud, and then, you got a lot of little horse leftovers, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, yuck. All right, so where are we now, and where do you think we're gonna be?
Oh, it's in terms of electric cars or anything in general.
Yeah. Let's keep on the transportation stuff a little bit, because you said I think you had something about Smithsonian, 1958, and flying cars and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Smithsonian magazine was talking about flying cars, and their magazines are pretty well. It's one of the better written magazines that I know of, and I presume it was then. And it's folks looking into the future. They call it the flying carpet car. And we had the Jetsons, the cartoon, thinking about all that stuff. There are some models we've seen out that can fly, cars that can fly, cars that can be boats. And the Terrafugia TFX is one that I recall reading about. But I think the Jay Leno thought is one of the things that really intrigued me. Jay is quite a car buff, has a garage filled with all kinds of cars, and has his own car show. And he believes that in the future, that automated vehicles are just going to take over, and they won't even be our vehicles. Little pods will come and pick us up, and we'll go to an automated shuttle, and that's how we'll get around. But so vehicles will be like yacht clubs are now. If you want to have a 1964 Mustang, you're going to have it in a garage out somewhere in the country. You'll jump in your the automated pod, and it'll take you out to the garage, and then you'll get to drive your Mustang around out in the country. But it won't be the one you drive to work anymore. So that's because one of the challenges is infrastructure with when we talk about making more rapid mass transit. We got to build a lot of infrastructure. You got to build it through urban areas. You got to disrupt a lot of things. And in fact, we have the infrastructure there already for automated vehicles. The challenge with it is that we're still driving. There's still people driving, crossing those streets and doing all those things. So automated vehicle technology has to be pretty perfect to make sure it can avoid humans. Basically, is the answer. But if you could kind of start up, you could just kind of start over again and say, look, well, let's just use that infrastructure to move people around in automated vehicles. We could do a lot of things. It could be computer controlled. It would know how to use the least trafficked areas. There's a lot could be done with that, and we're going to get there. But it's because we all want to drive and have our independence, kind of the American way, right? It's going to be harder to do. I don't have the numbers at hand right now, but I know I think it was Ford did a survey of different countries, and the people that are much more willing to go the automated vehicle route was much higher in places like Japan and Europe than it is in the U.S.
Interesting, fascinating, huh? Yeah, I mean, I'm reading The Future is Faster Than You Think, and they talk about the convergence of all these technologies. So the convergence of electric vehicles, of computers, of AI, of advanced materials. And one of the things you're talking about is that actually the flying automated vehicle could be here sooner than we think. Which would be really interesting to see, right? If we do start flying around with the Jetsons and we don't even have to drive, it'll just be all automated. So,
yeah, it's I've when I think about the number of cars on the road and I start thinking about the number of flying vehicles there would have to be to complement that, I start to get nervous about how many might fall out of the sky when they get the equivalent of a flat tire. But it does take more energy to keep a vehicle in the air than it does. I mean, the flying carpet car in 1958 was it used compressed air, pushed air down beneath it, so it sort of floated over a flat infrastructure, and that's how it got around. But and the other thing is, and you know this probably better than I do, is that it doesn't help much for a greenhouse gas perspective to have an electric car if the energy comes from coal.
right.
So you got to go back to your commodity capital infrastructure. If you've got the Tesla battery in your garage and the solar on your roof and electric car, you've kind of got the whole package.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. So basically, what we're moving towards is an all-electric future, powered clean energies, powered by solar on our homes, solar and wind and other sources of renewables in the grid that then supplies homes that either can't have solar or that we need more of, or we need it for bigger, denser urban areas. But then let's talk about the home. So now, the idea of an all-electric home where you have solar with your electric vehicle. The electric vehicle not only provides you transportation, but it also doubles as an emergency backup power source. So as of today, the Nissan Leaf can supply enough power to supply an average home for 5 days. So that's pretty cool. But then
I hadn't heard that stat. That's a good stat.
Is that a great stat? Yeah, that's a really interesting stat, right? Yeah, so actually there's some guys coming out with some hardened software this year that will enable you to do just that, to be able to use your Nissan Leaf, and there'll be other vehicles that do it soon as well. Leaf's the only one that's in the US right now that can do it. But yeah, it'll be able to run your house, for an average house, for up to 5 days. But okay, so let's talk about this all electric home, because I thought it was the best thing since sliced toast. You got this solar electric, you got your batteries for your car. The car can supply your battery power when the grid goes down. And then you got heat pumps, air and ground source heat pumps, geothermal in this part of the world, but let's call it ground source heat pumps for elsewise, that supplies your heating and cooling. And I thought it was the neatest, greatest thing that's just coming to here. But you enlightened me that actually there was a former movie star who then became president that had a whole concept of this a few years back. So tell us about that.
The Westinghouse Gold Medallion home in the 1950s. Live better with electricity, with none other than Ronald Reagan being the spokesperson of it.
Oh my gosh!
And who would have guessed, right? And so why they wanted to promote the use of cheap electricity. And it was the amazing part about this. And there's a video online I can share with you, Ron. I should have done it before we did this interview.
Yeah, send us the link. We'll put it up. We'll put it up in the podcast.
There's actually a video that goes through it and shows all this stuff. But it has motion sensors for the lights to go on automatically in the front. It's got a television camera that tells the hostess when guests have arrived. Let me think. Ring. Wireless doorbell camera. It's got an electric control and a weather center. That's Nest. a laundry program that determines the best options for each fabric. The first home laundry that can think is how they build it. Well, that's today's washers and dryers with all the settings, right? They had a miraculous electric oven. Let me think, what do we call that? A microwave. They had recipes on microfilms, and which is a little more clumsy than what we have today, but internet recipes on your tablet on the kitchen counter works pretty well. They had climate control walls that cooled in summer and heat in winter. They had automatic controls tied to the weather center that irrigates when the ground gets dry. Weather-based irrigation controllers. We have those today too. Then they would play the latest hit record, played at the press of a button automatically. Is that Pandora or is that Spotify? In 1950. Wow. Special speakers that surround you with music. That's surround sound. Home movies produced and directed by you with a home movie projector. Well, that's TikTok. It's, multiple apps. There's all the streaming. And the planetarium and the latest maps of the world at the push of the button so the kids can learn about geography. I think they call that the internet. The problem was that electricity was produced using fossil fuels was one of them. It was still cheap, but the folks came along with natural gas and said, "Oh, this is more cost effective, and you can manage the heat control better on your stove." And so it didn't all go away, but it delayed it. Probably rightfully so at that time. But if you think about it, if every home was electric and we had all the clean energy in place, we'd be in a better spot now than using natural gas.
Yeah. Wow. And that was Ronald Reagan in the 1950s. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So it's just amazing to me. I mean, we talked the other day, you said, well, Carl, you're kind of a historian. I don't really think about myself as a historian, but I am intrigued by how long it takes for thinking to really emerge. I mean, even climate, about greenhouse gases, and when did that start being really understanding that? Well, I go back to 1960, and Roger Revelle, who was one of the founders of the University of California at San Diego, was talking about it and getting funding in 1960. Briefed the Kennedy administration on it. Well, then you go back a little bit farther, and you go back to about 1904, early 1900s is when they did the first real test to try to figure out, the composition of gas, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how it had changed and the great granddaughter of that person went to high school with me. And so, but when did it really start thinking about? The first time where there was a real study on it was in 1857. So this is old stuff.
Wow.
And people have thought about the concept. And I have an article. When I was a little kid, I read a lot of magazines. I subscribed to a lot of magazines, sports and Field and Stream. But one of them was Scientific American. And the only article I saved out of all of those magazines I read when I was 9 years old was an article about climate change. And it basically predicted the things that we know today about climate change. It talked about we're going to determine if volcanoes play a role. It went through all of those kinds of things, and it was just fascinating to think that there was that level of thinking about it. I think that was 1957, wow. And for 59, wow. And just so it takes a long time for ideas and science and reality to move into the mainstream.
Yeah, I guess so. My gosh. But so is it that we're talking about the future is history, or is it history of the future? I don't know, but it's pretty amazing. So, all right. Well, tell us about Project X.
Project X was a Disney project in Florida, and this was really going to be a city of the future. And they actually got designated from the Florida state legislature to have all the rights as a city, and they were going to have really make it something, and it didn't work. Didn't work out, and they ended up building another Disneyland on the property, but there was a more interesting one, I think even today, was in Quay Valley. A developer, I forget his first name, his last name's Quay, obviously, and he wanted to build 100% solar city connected to the Hyperloop in the Central Valley, midway between LA and San Francisco. And the emphasis was going to be on a healthy lifestyle, walkable, bikeable community, 7,200 acres, 75,000 residents, and 95% capture and reuse of water, and all the bells and whistles that we want. And the note I made is to myself, is that going to succeed or become another Project X? And it unfortunately became another Project X. There were some water rights issues that they had to go through. They actually won those, but I think it was in 2017, they folded the project. But I thought it was a really great idea, particularly when you go back to what I was talking about with automated vehicles. And I actually talked to the developer. I sent him an email, and because my son had worked with his son on a political campaign, amazingly enough, and how great would it have been to create a brand new city that you didn't drive your car in that city. You just jumped on those pods and it was all automated. You could still have a car in a garage on the outskirts of the city, but it would be really a way to test that. But unfortunately, as innovative ideas are, they're tough to bring forward.
Wow. So what, it just collapsed because of the finances, or?
Yeah, I think there were just too many permitting difficulties, and one thing after another. And I think he just pushed it as far as he could, and it didn't make it. It just didn't make it. So
now that's a sad story. So give us something that's a little more upbeat and hopeful there, Carl, as we look to this future.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting is the 3D printers that can build houses.
That's really amazing. Yeah, so tell us about those.
Yeah, the UN estimates that by 2030, approximately 3 billion people will require housing, and 3D printers are being promoted as one potential solution. They can build, in Shanghai, they've got 3D printers that made 6 houses in 10 days. Wow. And they're not huge houses, but they're, I don't know. I don't have the info on how big they are, but they look like they're probably, 800 to 1,200 square feet, something like that. And a small single family home, and heck, fascinating. And then, the images around it of a 3D printer bigger than the house with concrete trucks coming out and pouring concrete into the 3D printer that goes back and forth and builds the layers of concrete that builds the house. Kind of fascinating.
Really fascinating. What do they do for all the internal electricity, plumbing, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, details beyond me, but conceptually, it's a lot of fun to think about.
Yeah. So you had said something about geothermal and lithium.
Yeah, it's geothermal, and I mentioned Imperial Valley. One of the, lithium is a pretty key component of where we go with automated vehicles and a lot of things that need batteries. And a lot of it's produced in China. Some of it's produced in, I think it's in Chile and South America. But they're trying to find really good places to get it here. And I just read yesterday that the last lithium mine that was working in the U.S. is in Nevada, has closed down. But there's Elon Musk is working on developing a mine that they get the lithium out of clay. He thinks he's got some patented technology, and one of the sources for lithium is in those out of the geothermal, the magma you were talking about. Is there's apparently a lot of lithium there. And Imperial Valley here in California has got a geothermal plant and a number of them, and they're doing explorations on how they can extract lithium from the hot water that comes out from down below, and the Breakthrough Energy, which is funded by folks like Steyer and Gates and Buffett, those kinds of folks, have invested $20 million in the Imperial Valley to pilot some of that. And there's some other investments too. So it's kind of fascinating. There's another whole area up in Northern California that they're looking at it as well. So we're kind of held hostage for lithium by other countries, and as important as it looks like it's going to be to the future until we find some more more components that can store energy. Finding out where we can have it here is important, and hopefully being able to do that in a environmentally sound way.
Wow. So as we get towards wrapping this up, in kind of conclusion and to give people some hope about how we get from here to there, looking at the historical perspective of where we thought we'd be, where we are, all the different things that we've had, what do you think is the greatest hope and what's energizing you the most these days?
Well, I think the greatest hope is that well, I think the U.S. is going to start taking a leadership role again in the clean energy arena. I think that's going to be important. Um, and frankly, I'm not feeling as hopeful as I'd like to feel for right now to answer that question. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think one of the challenges is that we've got to recognize in some way, shape, or form that there are limits to the resources that are available to us, and you know, we've got an economy that's built on consuming a lot of energy for all the things that we like to have and need to have, and you know, as we transition, you know, the developing world to have some of the same things that we have in the developed world in U.S. and Europe and others, it's going to require more and more energy, and we can't be blind to that. We've got to figure out what's real about the future of resources and how much are available to us. It's not endless. It's not endless. You know, the hopeful side, you know, I like Peter Diamandis, who's founded the X Prize Foundation. You know, he believes that technology is going to take us through all of this, but you know, whether it's water or whether it's energy, you know, there's limits, and we're pushing those limits right now, and it doesn't take much to break the logistics of those limits. I worry. I think the pandemic showed us a lot about what the potential might. When we get serious about climate change, and I'd like to think we are, but we're not. I think we're going to see things like what's happened with the pandemic. I think there will be serious restrictions on transportation. I think the kinds of things we do that use a lot of energy they will restrict us in some ways until we figure it all out. And because the challenges are big and the impacts are huge, they affect people here, but they also affect people all over the world and create, you know, lack of security. And I wrote an article for Fortune several years ago, and people don't talk about this, but a lot of what happened in Syria had to do with drought. Was that drought caused by climate change? Well, I'm not going to say that, but a serious drought in Syria displaced 1.5 million people that had otherwise lived on agriculture. They ended up being in refugee camps around the major cities. That made them susceptible to not having any money, to being recruited by some of the rebel groups that were like, you know, Al Qaeda and the others that were that needed bodies. And they said, okay, you know, whether they were believers or not, they did it because they could make some money. And so drought played a role in all of that unrest. You know, I remember when the Hurricane Katrina, we saw people, you know, huddled on the sides of the roadway on off ramps. You know, who thought there would be refugees in the U.S.? I mean, and I don't know what the status is today, but at one point, New Orleans population was only 75% of what it was before Katrina. And that wasn't the day after, it was a year or two after. So does it fill back up? I don't know, but there are impacts that affect us and affect people all over the world as we start to see sea level rise, you know, more intense storms. And we've got to address this stuff now.
Yeah, so we just did an interview with Dave Belote, another environmental entrepreneur, E2 member, who quoted the Defense Department as saying that climate change is the mother of all national security risk, both from the perspective of there's 30 different U.S. bases that are experiencing extreme flooding and being flooded time and again now, hurricanes and tornadoes that are causing billions of damage worth of infrastructure implications to the bases, but then in addition, you're exactly right, hundreds of millions of people that are now being displaced, forced into, you know, becoming refugees basically, and those refugees then opening up this whole pandemic of people that are just trying to survive, and where do they go, and how do they get by, and what do they do, they become just radicalized. So,
Well,
yep.
and not only that, the refugees spread and they try to get somewhere where they can live a better life. So when you look at what happened with Brexit, part of Brexit was Britain didn't want to have they wanted to have the ability to stop refugees from coming in. They didn't have that when they were part of the EU, because if you're in the EU, you can travel anywhere in the EU. And so once a refugee got into an EU country, they had a lot of mobility. And so that was part of the driver behind Brexit, not unlike what happened here on talking about the border and trying to close the border to Mexico, and these kinds of things are real, and they are already causing unrest in the world. I remember the first time I really understood this. I went to a conference at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and it was about in large part the military and its understanding of climate change. And boy, they had the head of the Air Force from India, and the head of another from the Philippines. I forget which service, but they had generals from other places around the world. And they said, kind of the message was, when you're in the military, you plan for what's possible. And they were worried, and because they know that when unrest happens, they are going to have to deploy the military to address those issues. And it's a real thing. It's real serious.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. We like to provide people some hope in these dark and dangerous times. So, you're right, it's not limitless, but as of today, there's still 1,000 times more energy in the air, water, earth, and sun than we currently consume. And at some point, we'll blow that away. But to give people some hope as a last kind of note, would you suggest that people do, and how can they help build this better future that we all want?
Well, I think one of the ways is and I hate to say this because there's a lot of it going on, but it's we really have to have education. We have to really have people understand that the transition from coal, and then from coal to natural gas, and then from natural gas to as much clean energy as possible is critical. And the same thing with automobile use. We really have to recognize that we have to figure out how to transition these industries that are a major part of our economy. It's about an economic question, Ron. This is not an environmental question in my mind. It's really an economic question. With a simple environmental problem, we create a law and we change it, and not too much happens. Because some companies have to object to it because they produce the products, but not that big of a deal. It's just an objection. But when you come to thinking about changing the energy mix in the world, you're talking about changing the global economy in a major, major way. And we aren't recognizing it as that. We're biting on the edges. So I think the right thing is to recognize we have to transition the capital that is currently in fossil fuels into another kind of capital that creates clean energy and other kinds of things. I know it's interesting. I was in a conference in Abu Dhabi and listening to a speaker who was talking about about what they're doing in the Middle East, and they're recognizing that. Why with all that oil are they doing solar? Well, they've got sun, and because they recognize that the value of that oil over time is going to be less, and so they're trying to position themselves to not have to be dependent on that oil. They'll sell as much of it as they can in the right marketplace, but we've got to make that shift, and we got to make that shift in a way that doesn't hurt people economically, or at least as little as possible. And we got to recognize that.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating to me that there is some recognition of that starting to happen for sure. As we have discussed previously, there's 3.4 million Americans already working in clean energy. That's triple the amount in the fossil fuel industry. You're seeing in the investment market $17 trillion of environmental, social, and governance (ESG) investments, and a decline in fossil fuel investments. People divesting from fossil fuel companies. People like Exxon, which was the number one corporation, wealthiest corporation in the world, losing 80% of their value over the past number of years because they just went all in on fossil fuels and they fought the transition. So I think the transition is happening. Absolutely agree with you. It's got to be faster. We have to accelerate it. Is there any one thing that you think that the average person can and should do that would make a difference, that would help?
Yeah, I think it's at the personal level. I think it's just recognizing how you minimize waste in all kinds of ways, and because when whether you're not thoughtful about the products you buy, the products you use, and what you do in your own home, waste of a product is also means that another product is going to be made that requires energy. So we need to really become a circular economy, green, truly green look at how we focus on the world. It's just living that lifestyle, and recognizing what's excessive and what isn't.
Yeah, so the personal piece that we all have responsibility, and we are a consumer-driven society, right? So if we as consumers wisen up, educate ourselves, and start to put our purchasing where our values are, that can make a tremendous difference. And I totally agree. And what we found is that it's kind of the three P's again. There's lots of P's out there, There's the public-private partnerships that help make a lot of things work. There's people, planet, and prosperity, or profits, depending upon who you talk to. But then the three P's that I like to think about are the personal, what we do as individuals and as families, the 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 personal, the professional, what we do at work, and how we each then interface with wherever it is that we're working and what we do there and what happens there. And one of the shows that we covered was actually Climate Voice, where people are having an impact on their employers and getting their employers not only to make the transitions themselves and employees having that impact, but the employers then also making the transition and then getting their lobbyists to lobby for policies. And that's the third P, the policies of politics, to actually get our local representatives, our state, our national representatives to put in place the policies that we need to make these transitions. So the
Yeah,
personal, professionals, the political, the policy piece.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you said something that probably is the most positive piece at all for me, and that is the move of companies to recognize that their primary goal is no longer just to make as much money as they can. They've got to address their stakeholder interests too, and that includes treating their employees fairly with equity in mind, and also playing a role in making sure that the policies of this country, as well as their own activities, are in doing what we need to do to move forward. And that's really going to be a critical thing. And I think that is positive. And thank you for reminding me of that. That is very positive if that happens.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it is happening. I like to follow Fortune magazine, which is really you think Fortune magazine. I don't know what it used to be in the old days, but I thought it was just like people looking for gold or something. And it has really become a thoughtful publication, looking at certainly a business publication, but a business publication that recognizes the future, talks to leading industry CEOs about the future and where it's going, and about these kinds of things.
Wonderful. Carl Nettleton, thank you so much, sir. And if you want people to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Yeah, I go to my website, www.nettstrategies.com. That's Nett strategies.com. And you can find me there.
Great. Thank you so much, Carl. It's a pleasure speaking with you. And thanks for the history of the future. Well, the future is history. I don't know, one or the other. So,
All right. Pleasure. Keep up your optimism. I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a downer there at the end. You got to speak truth to the problem, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you can't solve anything until you recognize you got a problem, right? So, absolutely. At this point, I think it's really important that in addition to recognizing the problem, which we absolutely have to do, and everyone's got to wake up to, we also have to provide hope, because I think a lot of people are just feeling so overwhelmed and so hopeless that you get paralyzed, right? When you don't think there's anything that you can do that's going to make a difference, you just don't do anything, in which case then we're doomed. So,
if I could close by making just a little bit of a pitch for myself, which I usually forget to do, is our tagline is helping people to think. And what we've learned is that when we're not a company that seeks out RFPs, we're a company that we look at problems that are challenging, that people don't even know how to write the RFP for it. And we find that once we get inside and start talking and working and investigating and looking, we usually see things that are different and helpful, and help those companies solve those problems. So helping people to think sounds like kind of a corny, optimistic tagline, but we really can do it. So,
Yeah, and when people think there's nothing that we can't accomplish, right? So,
yeah.
so Carl, thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure.